Hi everyone. Been lagging a bit with the podcasts, but here I am. I'm back. I'm realizing I have a little green spot on my shirt. That's because I've invested in a mic. So yeah, I've been a bit lagging, but I got some new equipment, so one step closer to being a bit more professional. I thought I'd do a little podcast on two composers that I keep referring to in my musical life and in my creative life, and just musically in general. And I'm not sure they really relate to each other. Definitely not when it comes to um, having been alive at the same time. But I feel that they do relate to the way I perhaps approach music and perhaps the way with each of them, I've sort of reached a milestone in my um, musical development, let's say. The first one is Johann Sebastian Bach, or Johann Sebastian Bach for everyone else that doesn't pronounce his name properly. Not that I do. Um, Actually, look, he's literally everywhere. For me, there is music before him and after him, I guess. To me, he's a bit the father of music um, from a Western world perspective. I mean, I don't know a single composer that, first of all, has had such an influence on such an amount of musicians, composers, improvisers, regardless of their musical tradition, their instruments, but also someone who is still so appropriate and in line and sort of understood and relevant um, still to this day. And I don't think this will change anytime soon. I mean, Buff's music is really one that doesn't go out of fashion. I mean, I think on the other extreme scale of this, you would have music from the 80s, which only took about 50 years before sounding out of fashion. He's been writing his music for over 300 years, and I mean, he stopped writing that music, but he had written that music for over 300 years. And it still sounds fresh and new. And um, why do I feel he's so relevant to me? I think because when I started learning composing, and I've pretty much done this on my own, he was very um, useful in a way in understanding how to structure music. And up to today, a lot of the music that I write is based on some of his structures. Um, he's very mathematical. Um, he has a very interesting approach to his music, and is in a way he is sort of the opposite of the romantics, you know. And when you listen to piano works, I think the music of Bach is a lot less fluid in a way, in terms of spontaneity of the ideas, than the one of Chopin, for instance. But I find that he has an understanding of direction that's really, really interesting. He also works. I mean, he was clearly unique in the sense that he would do this almost on the spot, whilst I do this with lots of hours and hours of mapping and writing down and trying to understand direction and logic and understanding. He seems to, you know, had been able to do this, you know, from simply improvising. But he has an understanding of structure and sort of in a very seller way, I'd say. When you look at his music, you can really sort of take out a very easy blueprint of the music and follow it very easily. I think he's also very adventurous, particularly when you think of what followed him. And we all know the story about Bach, and we all know that he was sort of forgotten, and people wouldn't really pay attention to him until Mendelssohn brought him back to the front. But yeah, you listen to everything that's been in between him and the Romantics, and there's a lot more complexity. There's a lot more of a feeling of adventure, harmonically at least, in the way he sort of treats his music. And also he has a very unique way of approaching melody, and he sort of seemed to favor melodic lines against harmonic lines. And what I'm trying to say essentially is that he thinks of his music in a very horizontal way, as opposed to the vertical way of moving from one chord to another and thinking of a sort of vertical progression. He seems to go through horizontally, yet there is always harmonic movement. So I find this really, really interesting. And last but not least, one of the reasons why he resonates so much with me is that I started my musical development when it comes to composing music through Philip Glass, essentially, who is perhaps the most important influence in my music. And for some reason, I could sort of relate to Bach very easily from a minimalist perspective. And it really feels like his music is, in a way, minimalist. It's very complex. There's a lot of notes. It's very different to what Glass and Steve Reich are doing, for instance. Yet there is that reduction to the bare necessities of the music. And there is that approach to, once again, to structure, which to me makes a lot of sense from a perspective of minimalism. So he's the first one. I don't know what you think about this, but to me he's the first one that really sort of had an impact on my perception of music. And I think I'm far from being the only one. I mean, everyone seems to adore Bach, and rightfully so. The second one, who might be a bit more surprising, so I'm excluding Philip Glass because I think Philip Glass is my constant inspiration in terms of what I'm trying to achieve, both from a career perspective and from a creative perspective. And it's really hard for me to hide it, although I do hope that my music sounds a bit different. But the second one, who was another turning point for me, was, and I'm thinking about this because I've recently seen a quote from Stravinsky on John Cage. And the quote goes in the line of, he's talking about 4 minutes 33, and he's talking about how he hopes that his silences will keep getting longer and longer. So I don't think Stravinsky was a big fan of John Cage. And funny enough, Stravinsky is also a very important influence for me. So see how sometimes you sort of you connect dots that would have not really made sense. Anyway, John Cage, very important, because I think John Cage is, before being, at least in my opinion, before being a musician, to me he's a bit of a philosopher. And he had an incredible mind. And essentially, for me, what I find the most interesting about John Cage, and strangely enough, it's not so much his music. I do like his music, but I'm sort of more influenced by his life and his thoughts more than his music. I do love a lot of what he's done, but it's really his approach to music, and it's also his approach to art in general, and how the influence of the East, the Far East, sort of changed the direction of music. And I think he's really important because John Cage, to me, is alongside Eric Satie, is responsible for having, you know, changed direction of music in terms of the way we perceive it. And I think if today we see music not only as being something that we can enjoy proactively, but if we see it as something passive as well, if we see it as something that decorates our lives. And I mean, how many people today listen to music without really listening to music? They sort of decorate silence in a way, if we could put it like this. But he's really one of the few people that have worked towards this idea, and I think this comes a lot from the Far East, from the philosophies of Zen Buddhism, and yeah, I really think it's interesting, and I also like the way although he was sort of trained and he knew the rules, he didn't wait too long before breaking them, and he really had this approach of whatever works. And I really like this idea of the way he's sort of put all sounds on the same line and accepting that music doesn't have to come out of a music instrument. I think it's a really interesting concept. And yeah, and I think, alongside a few other important composers for me, I think him and Bach are sort of people I keep referring to whenever I try to write music, and people I keep going to in terms of ideas. Bach is very much in his music. Cage is very much in his writings. And for some reason, I sort of feel like that they're connected. I feel that both were trying to sort of reach out to the divine and the sacred through their music in very, very different ways. And actually, one point that I really enjoy about John Cage, and he's completely changed my perception of music on this, and I'll finish on that point. But he has, so I used to perceive music as being a language, and I think this comes from the fact that I've studied and I've listened to a lot of jazz, and it's true that when it comes to jazz, there is that element of communication between musicians, and there is that element of speaking a particular language and understanding each other, and corresponding with each other. And Cage sort of turned this upside down when he actually sort of brought a point of saying, essentially, music is a way to connect yourself to the divine. He would put music on the same level as meditation, and it does make a lot of sense. And once I've started thinking about this, I've realized actually it is true that music is one of the few artistic activities, that demands so much from the mind that it sort of cleans everything that surrounds it. And at least this applies to me, but it is true that when I do perform music, my mind is focused solely on this, and it's really a way to access a level of thought that is very different, and it in a way it's almost actually non-thinking. And this sort of idea, this way of perceiving it, really came from reading about Cage, and listening to what he had to say, and reading what he had to say, and yeah, this was really like a sort of turning point for me. So I just thought I'd do a little podcast on this, to see what you think. If you feel that they relate, if you feel that they don't, if you like Bath but you don't enjoy listening to Cage, or the other way around. I don't know a lot of people who enjoy Cage's music, to be honest, because it's a bit adventurous. But I think that's the interesting thing with music, is that you don't necessarily have to enjoy the music to take pleasure in it, and to take an interest in it and to be influenced by it. I mean, I love free jazz, for instance, but I have to be honest, it's sort of hard to listen to 60 minutes of pure free jazz. It's very intense. So yeah, I'll wrap up on this. Once again, the podcast is always available on Spotify. It's here on Instagram. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll try to launch a few new series of podcasts in relation to my label No Ox. So there'll be some updates in the future. Feel free to comment. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you have a few composers like this that you really feel have had an importance in your music. And if you want to, I'll be more than happy to give you examples of some of the pieces I've written with them in mind. And there's quite a bit. And you can see if you sense the influence, if you feel the influence of those musicians. Thanks again for listening. It was 16 minutes of your time, so thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I'll see you next time.